At first, I didn't think it was real. I woke up to this blinding light, and I was transported to another place. Pluto TV! Then I heard a voice.
Come with me if you want to live.
There were thousands of movies and shows, and they were all free.
The truth is ours.
It's just so beautiful.
On Pluto TV, free streaming of Terminator 2, Fringe, Arrow, The 100, and The X-Files may cause excitement, loss of sleep, and sudden belief in extraterrestrials. No credit cards or alien encounters necessary. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I discuss true crime cases involving military members and veterans. And I do this all with one goal in mind: to remind us to remain vigilant always. Happy summer, friends. Now, if you can imagine this, in the last 8 days, I have put on 3 birthday parties for my kiddos. And to be honest, I'm exhausted. But let me explain why in the world I would put on 3 birthday parties. So it turns out that we are all summer babies. And while only one birthday officially already took place this year, I always host their birthday parties within a week of school letting out because I know that everyone has summer plans. All that to say, happy birthday to my baby who officially turned 5 years old. Y'all, I can't even believe it. She's 5, which means this podcast is almost 7. And really, I just keep wondering, where did time go? Well, listen, as we get into full summer mode, please be safe out there. Be sure to watch your kids like hawks near pools and all bodies of water. And let's make sure that we're all encouraging our kids to wear their helmets when riding bicycles, scooters, and especially anything electronic like an e-bike, an e-scooter, those types of things. With that, let's get into today's case. Today, I am bringing you a case out of Japan. It's a 20-year-old case, but it's a case that still comes up when discussing Japan-U.S. Forces agreements today. Join me today as I discuss the case of Yoshie Sato. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
On the morning of January 3rd, 2006, the streets of Yokosuka, Japan were quiet. The New Year holiday was still winding down, and most people were at home sleeping after celebrating with family the night before. But in one section of the city near Yokosuka Chuo Station, a 56-year-old woman named Yoshie Sato was already awake and heading to work. It was still dark outside. The sun was just beginning to rise, and the air carried that cold January dampness that settles into coastal cities before dawn. Yoshie walked the same route that she had walked countless times before. She carried her purse and moved with purpose as she headed to work. At the same time, somewhere nearby, there was a young American sailor assigned to the USS Kitty Hawk who was wandering through the street after a night of drinking. He was 21 years old, and he was reportedly angry, frustrated, and broke. According to prosecutors, this guy wanted money. And within minutes, these two strangers' paths crossed. What happened next shocked Japan. It reignited long-standing tensions surrounding the American military presence overseas, and it left one family devastated forever. Because by the end of that morning, Yoshie Sato would be dead, and the man responsible would be a member of the United States Navy. This is the murder of Yoshie Sato. To understand why this case became so significant, you first need to understand Yokosuka itself. Yokosuka sits south of Tokyo in Kanagawa Prefecture and is home to one of the most strategically important American naval bases in the world. The United States 7th Fleet operates out of Yokosuka, and for decades, the city has existed in this unusual overlap between Japanese civilian life and American military culture. Thousands of U.S. service members rotate through this area. American sailors live, work, and spend their free time there. Entire sections of the city cater to military personnel. As you can imagine, there are nightclubs, bars, restaurants, and businesses that are completely built around that economy. But the relationship between local communities and the American military has also been complicated for decades. There has been previous incidents involving service members stationed in Japan. There have been assaults, drunk driving incidents, sexual assaults, violent crimes, and every major incident reignited public frustration and political tension, especially surrounding the legal agreements governing U.S. military personnel overseas. So, by early 2006, there was already underlying resentment in parts of Japanese society. And then Yoshie Sato was killed. Suddenly, what could have been viewed as an isolated murder case became something much larger. Now, before discussing the crime itself, it's very important to understand who Yoshie Sato was as a person, because it becomes very easy in cases like this for victims to be reduced to a single moment in their lives. Yoshie was born on February 28, 1949 in Yokosuka. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, and according to her family, she had a strong personality and a powerful sense of justice. Her brother later described her as someone who was not afraid to speak up if she believed something was wrong. She would even confront police officers if she thought they were doing something that was wrong. And that was her personality, even if it made people uncomfortable. She was also deeply devoted to her family. At the time of her death, Yoshie had children and grandchildren. Now, I do want to say that her children were not her biological children, but they were the children of her second husband who passed away, and all of those children called her mom. Now, for employment, Yoshie worked cleaning buses. It was a physically demanding job that required her to leave home right before sunrise. And despite the early hours and the hard labor, she maintained routines and hobbies outside of work. Her family said she loved gardening, knitting, puzzles, golf, and she created art using traditional Japanese paper. At the time, she was also engaged to be married and had recently purchased an apartment with her fiancé. There is something profoundly heartbreaking about learning all these details about Yoshie because they paint such a clear picture of just a normal, full life. Yoshie was not involved in anything dangerous. She was not taking risks. She wasn't partying till the wee hours of the night. She was simply a woman trying to support herself and care for her family. And on January 3rd, 2006, she was heading to work exactly as she had done many times before. William Oliver Reese Jr. was 21 years old and assigned to the USS Kitty Hawk, an aircraft carrier forward deployed to Yokosuka. He had been in the military for 2 years. Reese joined the Navy as a young man from New Jersey, but according to prosecutors, he had become increasingly unhappy while stationed overseas. Court reporting later suggested that he struggled with homesickness, alcohol use, frustration with how much he made as a sailor, and dissatisfaction with military life overall. Now, it's important to say this clearly. None of those factors excuse what he did next. Thousands of service members experience stress, loneliness, and alcohol-related problems without ever becoming violent. But prosecutors believe that Reese had entered a dangerous downward spiral in the days leading up to the murder. During the New Year holiday period, Reese reportedly spent considerable time drinking in Yokosuka's nightlife district. On the night before Yoshie's murder, he had been out drinking for hours, and sometime before dawn, instead of returning directly to base, he remained wandering through the city by himself. According to prosecutors, Reese wanted money. He wasn't looking for a large amount of money, just enough so that he can continue drinking and spending. And sometime during those early morning hours, he made the decision to rob someone on the street. Shortly after 6 a.m., Yoshie Sato was walking near Yokosuka Choho Station on her way to work. At some point, Reese approached her. According to prosecutors, he initially asked Yoshie for directions to the nearby U.S. naval base, and Yoshie actually stopped to help the young man. That detail has always stood out in this case because it makes what happened next feel even more cruel. Prosecutors say that as Yoshie was beginning to help the man, Reese grabbed for Yoshie's purse in an attempt to rob her, but Yoshie resisted the attack, and this is where it escalated dramatically. Investigators believed that Yoshie fought back hard. She screamed loudly enough to attract attention, and prosecutors argued that Reese panicked when the robbery stopped being quick and easy. Instead of fleeing, however, Reese dragged Yoshie into the recessed entrance area of a nearby building. He then violently assaulted Yoshie for approximately 11 minutes. He repeatedly punched her, slapped her into concrete surfaces, stomped on her body, and inflicted catastrophic injuries. 11 minutes. That is an extraordinary long time in the context of a violent assault. And that detail became critically important later on during the trial because it directly undermined any argument that the killing was merely a brief accidental escalation during a robbery. This was prolonged violence, sustained violence. And according to court reporting, surveillance cameras captured portions of the attack, both the video recording and the audio recording. During Reese's subsequent trial, prosecutors played surveillance footage and audio connected to the attack inside the courtroom. Members of Yoshie's family were present, and according to reporting from Stars and Stripes, the courtroom heard Yoshie screaming during the assault, along with a male voice with an American accent demanding money. Yoshie's family reportedly became emotional listening to the recording. Several relatives cried openly in court, as you can imagine. And honestly, it's difficult to imagine anything more devastating than hearing the final moments of someone that you love played aloud in a courtroom. Unlike many homicide cases where families are left wondering what happened during the victim's final moments, Yoshie's family didn't have to imagine. They knew. They heard the terror in her voice. Eventually, the assault stopped. According to prosecutors, Reese took approximately 15,000 yen from Yoshie's purse, which amounted to roughly $130 at the time. Then he simply walked away as if nothing happened. He then entered a convenience store before returning to base and continuing with his day. Now, the reports are mixed as to whether he made it onto base and actually went to work or whether he was stopped at the base because he had blood on him. But anyway, that post-crime behavior became important during trial because prosecutors argued it demonstrated awareness and control. Reese did not appear disoriented or detached from reality afterward. Instead, he appeared completely capable of calmly resuming normal activity. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, Yoshie was still alive despite the 11-minute attack. A nearby resident eventually found her critically injured and contacted emergency services. Yoshie was transported to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. She had suffered severe internal injuries and internal bleeding. Later that same day, Yoshie Sato died. The investigation moved quickly after that, and authorities, because they had surveillance evidence and witness information, they were able to narrow the timeline. And because Reese was a U.S. service member, the case immediately became highly sensitive politically and diplomatically. Japanese investigators identified Reese quickly. Within days, the U.S. military transferred him into Japanese custody. Oddly enough, I did see a picture on NBC News of the transfer, and there are 2 military escorts wearing black gloves escorting Reese. And Reese is covered with a blanket as he's turned over. It's definitely a very weird image. Well, as you can imagine, the decision to turn over an American service member to Japanese authorities for criminal prosecution is hotly debated because it is governed by the Status of Forces Agreement, aka the SOFA. The SOFA agreement between the U.S. and Japan has been controversial for years because it determines how criminal investigations and prosecutions involving U.S. military personnel are handled. Critics in Japan have long argued that the agreement sometimes favors American interests over those of the locals and over local accountability. So whenever a violent crime involving a service member does occur, questions about jurisdiction and custody become politically explosive. And the thing is that despite how quickly Reese was turned over, public anger in Japan grew because this was not viewed simply as an isolated robbery homicide. Instead, people saw Yoshie's murder as another example of a deeper problem involving misconduct by military personnel stationed overseas.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
As news spread throughout Japan, public reaction intensified rapidly. The image of a local woman beaten to death on her way to work by an American sailor, well, as you can imagine, it struck a nerve across the country. And it's important to remember that the murder occurred within a broader historical context. Crimes involving U.S. personnel in Japan had previously triggered major political controversy, particularly in Okinawa and other communities hosting American bases. So it's not surprising that when Yoshie Sato was killed, people immediately viewed the crime through that larger lens. The Navy recognized as well how serious the fallout could become. In response, military leadership imposed curfews, alcohol restrictions, mandatory Liberty Buddy system, and periods of reflection for service members connected to the Yokosuka area. The restrictions were designed not only to address discipline issues, but also to demonstrate publicly that military leadership understood the seriousness of the situation. Well, almost immediately, Japanese prosecutors charged Reese with robbery murder. That legal distinction mattered enormously because robbery murder carries severe penalties under Japanese law, including the possibility of execution. The prosecution's theory was relatively straightforward, as was the evidence. Reese intended to rob Yoshie Sato. When she resisted, he intentionally used extreme violence to overpower and silence her. The robbery and killing were therefore inseparable parts of the same criminal act. This seems kind of akin to the U.S. crime of felony murder. After Reese was charged, his defense was in a really tight spot because there was overwhelming evidence against the guy. Not only did he admit responsibility once he was caught, like the same day, but there was surveillance footage. So the defense strategy focused on mitigation. The defense emphasized Reese's age, which was 21. They also emphasized his intoxication level, emotional instability, and lack of prior violent criminal history. They attempted to portray this guy as an immature young sailor who spiraled out of control rather than a calculated killer. But prosecutors repeatedly returned to one fact. The violence lasted a whopping 11 minutes. Imagine taking a pillow. I want you, my listener right now, to imagine taking a pillow and punching and kicking that pillow and slamming it against the floor for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a hella long time. Of course, that timeline was devastating for the defense because sustained violence suggested repeated opportunities that this man could have stopped, repeated opportunities for him to regain control. And according to prosecutors, Reese never stopped. It's not every day you see a U.S. service member being tried by a foreign country. But when it does occur, it is huge news. Reese's trial began in March of 2006 in Yokohama District Court. He was tried by a 3-judge panel, Judge Masazo Ogura presiding. Reese appeared in court and admitted killing Yoshie Sato. He bowed his head and apologized repeatedly during proceedings. At various points, Reese claimed he lost control. He blamed the alcohol, and he described himself as angry and emotionally unstable during the attack. But his explanations often lacked clarity and consistency. And the thing with that is that when defendants do offer vague or shifting explanations for extreme violence, courts frequently interpret that uncertainty negatively, especially in serious homicide cases. Meanwhile, prosecutor Tashimi Honda carefully reconstructed the attack in court. He explained that Yoshie wasn't even the first person that Reese approached that morning. She was the second, and when he approached her, he asked her for directions in Japanese. The prosecutor then emphasized the brutality of the assault, the vulnerability of a victim walking to work in the morning, and Reese's behavior after the attack, including going into a convenience store to wash his hands, returning to work, and spending the stolen money on sex show entertainment and drinks at a bar. They also highlighted the relatively small amount of money stolen, arguing that the killing was wildly disproportionate to the original motive. One of the most emotional moments of the trial, though, came when Yoshie's family addressed the court directly. Her brother Shuichi Sanada described seeing Yoshie after the attack. Horrified, he said his sister's face was swollen, damaged, and unrecognizable. He spoke openly about the pain of losing his big sister and the horror of knowing how much she must have suffered, not only during the 11-minute attack, but for the remainder of her life. But I do want to point out that despite their grief, Yoshie's family repeatedly made it clear that they didn't blame all American service members for what happened to Yoshie. Instead, they focused their anger specifically on Reese and on the systematic failures they believed allowed the crime to occur. That restraint gave their statements significant credibility. During closing arguments, prosecutors sought life imprisonment rather than the death penalty. And that decision surprised some observers because Yoshie's family reportedly wanted Reese executed. But prosecutors explained that Reese's age, remember he was 21, his lack of significant prior criminal history, and relatively early confession weighed against pursuing capital punishment. In Japan, death sentences are generally reserved for especially aggravated murders involving multiple victims or exceptionally calculated brutality. Although Yoshie's murder was undeniably horrific, prosecutors apparently believed life imprisonment was the more realistic outcome in this case. On June 2, 2006, after pleading guilty, the court sentenced William Oliver Reese Jr. to life imprisonment with forced labor. The presiding judge described the crime as shocking and dreadful and concluded that Reese demonstrated extreme disregard for human life. However, the court also acknowledged Reese's confession and apparent remorse as mitigating factors. Following the sentencing, Reese technically retained military status for administrative purposes connected to the SOFA, though he would ultimately receive an other-than-honorable discharge and no military pay. And for those of you wondering how long life imprisonment in Japan actually is, according to a Stars and Stripes article, life imprisonment in Japan technically means they are eligible for parole after serving 10 years. But given a list, a few have been paroled after 20 years, but even after granted parole, these convicts remain under mandatory probationary supervision for life. For most criminal cases, sentencing marks the end of the story, but Yoshie Sato's family was not finished seeking accountability. In October of 2006, the family filed a civil lawsuit seeking approximately 200 million yen in damages, which equates to roughly $1.2 million today. The lawsuit targeted Reese and the Japanese government, and the reasoning behind it was extremely significant. The family argued that military-related misconduct involving alcohol had already become a recurring issue before Yoshie's death. In other words, they believed warning signs existed long before Reese murdered Yoshie. Their argument essentially raised a larger societal question. At what point does repeated misconduct stop being viewed as isolated individual behavior and start becoming evidence of institutional failure? That question lingered long after the criminal trial ended. A few years after the suit was filed, the Japanese Supreme Court held that Reese alone was responsible and that he should be responsible for paying the requested fine. However, despite the fact that Reese was solely found responsible, the U.S. agreed to pay 40% of Reese's portion, but wanted Yoshie's family to sign a document basically absolving them of any future liability. Yoshie's family did not agree, but of course, because Reese had no means to pay, by 2017, when they didn't get any money, Yoshie's family agreed to sign the settlement that the U.S. gave them if the Japanese government asked the U.S. government to remove the clause about no future liability. I have been unable to find the conclusion of this settlement payment, but as of an article written in 2020, the settlement had not been signed at the time. Yoshie's murder intensified debate surrounding the American military presence in Japan and the SOFA. For many Japanese citizens, the case represented something larger than a single homicide. It represented accumulated frustration. Communities hosting military bases often carry a very significant burden. It's a burden of increased noise, alcohol-related incidents, and crime associated with large populations of young service members stationed far from home. Now, to be fair, the overwhelming majority of American military personnel stationed in Japan and elsewhere never commit violent crimes, Many build respectful relationships within local communities. And let's not forget how much money we, the military community, bring into those economies. But serious incidents have an oversized impact because they reinforce existing fears and resentments. And Yoshie's murder became one of those incidents. Years later, members of Yoshie's family and her fiancé continued speaking publicly about accountability and prevention. According to reporting from the Asia-Pacific Journal, they believed governments often prioritized maintaining the U.S.-Japan alliance over fully addressing the human costs borne by victims and families of those who live in those communities. But listen, going back to Yoshie's case, I think that the most disturbing detail in Yoshie's case that makes it especially tragic is that she stopped to help Reese, and that Reese asked for directions in the native language. That was the interaction that placed Yoshie in danger. She saw a young sailor asking for directions, and she responded with kindness. And despite that kindness, within moments, she was fighting for her life. Sometimes in cases involving politics, military policy, or even international controversy, the victim can become overshadowed by the larger debate. That should never happen, though. At its core, this case is about a woman. It's about Yoshie, who left for work and never returned. Yoshie was a daughter. She was a sister. She was a mother. She was a grandmother. She was a fiance, someone who loved gardening, puzzles, golf, and spending time with her family. Someone whose final moments were unimaginably violent. And no matter how many political conversations emerged afterward, that human loss remained at the center of everything. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for listening to this episode of Military Murder. If you found this episode meaningful and you would like to hear more information about the Japanese-U.S. SOFA agreement and basically how it's been going through the years, please consider joining my Patreon, where I will be giving you guys a little bit more information on that relationship and the different cases, and the 1995 case specifically that sparked this outrage. You can sign up for Patreon for as little as $5 a month by visiting patreon.com/militarymurder. And also, the last couple of episodes and for the rest of the summer, I will be posting all of my episodes completely ad-free if you sign up for Patreon under the free tier. And of course, if you sign up for the $5 tier, not only do you get ad-free episodes, but you also get access to one bonus episode a month, as well as the over 60 bonus episodes that are currently in the files. If you want to leave a 5-star rating, I would greatly appreciate it. Just click 5 stars and just tell me some kind words. My sources for this episode include reporting by Stars and Stripes, New York Times, BBC News, CBS News, and NBC News. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.